A while back, I was on r/LFG trying to find a game to join. I found a DM looking for players for a dark and gritty campaign. Seemed interesting, so I reached out. DM was super sketchy with his setting, not wanting to share a single detail. They'd only had one session so far, and 3 out of 5 people dropped out. Wouldn't say why. Every time I'd ask about this world, he said that I needed to discover things for myself. Like, I understand wanting to keep things mysterious, but then he said I needed to write a minimum of a 1,000 word backstory to be considered for the campaign. I'd ask about his world so I could figure out backstory, but he wouldn't share anything except a city was dealing with a plague. Seems crazy to me that he would expect this from people for even just a chance to join. Alright everyone, I have a brilliant idea on how to get as many people to join my campaign as possible. I am going to require a massive essay and give them no material to actually make it. My brilliance, it is unrivaled. This one is fresh, as in, I ghosted the guy last night. A little preface, I enjoyed playing a female character of noble or high-born birth who runs away from home because she doesn't want the whole arranged marriage politics deal. It's probably a bit cliche and I'm running out of variations on this backstory, but hey, I enjoy it. I applied to a game ran by, quote, a DM who a friend of a friend knew and was looking for players. Okay. And after a short vetting process, in hindsight it was a very short vetting process, I was told what limitations were in character creation. Okay, cool. I ended up with a TCE custom lineage half-elf divination wizard, daughter of a baron, who, through some experimenting with far-reaching portents, found out her arranged marriage to a commander of the army of a neighboring barony was part of a larger plan by the commander, which would culminate in her being used as a pseudo-lich under his thrall, with which he planned to use to rise in power. DM liked the story but asked if we could make a few changes. I figured I'd hear him out. First, he thought it may be interesting if this happened after the marriage. He gave a few arguments, legitimacy to the commander's quest to take me back, and reasons for other members of the nobility to actively help track me down. The idea was interesting, so yeah, I went with this change. Next thing he addressed was the wedding night, which was a red flag. He didn't even give an argument in favor of. He just suggested we'd have our first night together, or maybe even had been married for some time and had kids. I decided to veto the kids, but wasn't opposed to marriage having been a few years past already, I guess. Then he brought up how, in the time, noble girls were married off young. I was stupid enough to ask for elaboration, and he said,
"Oh, well, 14 or maybe 15, I think. That's old enough to have children, so that's when it's best to get started."
I wisely left him on red and asked this friend of a friend if this was normal behavior for this guy. Still, no answer. Hello, fellows out there. If your DM launches into a lengthy, unneeded explanation of why your underage character should be a mom and have kids, you should probably leave. I think you guys already know that pretty well already, though. I think we should just cue the next story. I joined a game run by a friend of a friend 3 or 4 years back. The campaign had been going on for 10 or so sessions, so it wasn't too hard to blend into the group. However, some NPCs and one player character were characters from a much older campaign that ended a long time ago. In the first session, DM introduced me to his system. It was entirely homebrew and geared for more casual play, which is not a problem whatsoever. The first thing that caught me off guard was that the DM told me to roll for racing class. I brushed it off as convenient, seeing as I didn't know what races or classes were even available. I quickly realized that nobody else was rolling. They already had characters. In the party there was Smith, a halfling fighter/thief taken from the previous campaign, Sybil, a human magician, entirely a lovable player and developed character whom I'd love to play with again, Hilda, a DMPC fighter who was really there because the encounters were balanced for 4 people. She essentially disappeared out of combat. That said, I rolled a D100 for race and another for class. First, I rolled cleric. I enjoy sport characters, so I had no issue whatsoever. For race, I rolled a 22. 22 meant I was a gnome. The DM sighed and asked me to roll again. 22. DM was visibly upset, mentioning that the only number for gnome was that, and said that I was going to have to try hard to make him warm up to my character because he hates gnomes. About 30 minutes of rolling later, I had a standard set of 6 stats as well as sight, smell, taste, and hearing. I was also 478 years old and an aristocrat who worshipped the god of elemental earth. I wasn't entirely clear on the rules, but the DM did a good job of explaining as we went. The party met in the city of Fish Ponds, a gnomocracy, funny enough, that was under bombardment by a mad mage. It seemed like the DM went out of his way to make the resident gnomes particularly unlikable, but the story was set up fairly smooth-like. The party adventured into the mage's tower and began clearing out traps. I was in the back line of the party, yet, as I stepped onto a tile everybody else happened to have dodged, a hellhound was summoned right next to me. Cue combat. First turn of combat, I attempted to dispel undead and rolled a 100, which was a critical success. The hellhound immediately burst into flames, which dealt an alarming amount of damage to me, and me alone. The damage was so grievous that one of my arms had to be amputated, which meant I had a 50% chance to fail any spell or attack until I visited a healer. I also couldn't heal it myself because my magic is benevolent and does not allow such selfish motivations. The DM PC made a mocking comment about gnomes again, and we went on our way. It was also worth noting that because the combat was so short, it apparently meant we didn't deserve a single experience point. 1 or 2 rooms later, we reached the top of the tower, a giant crystal overcharged with necromantic energy hovering in the center of the room. Waves of pitch-black darkness pulsed through the air as the crystal searched for life to consume. Smith noticed that the space above the crystal was seemingly unaffected, and Sybil decided to use some magic to scribe a scroll of teleportation so that we could dodge whatever the crystal might do. Sybil began to chant, and Smith and DMPC Hilda all disappeared in a puff of smoke, reappearing on top of the crystal. I was still at the entrance to the room. I asked the DM why that was. Sybil knew that the scroll affected any number of creatures and swore that she meant to bring me along too. Apparently, because Sybil was human, the magic did not identify that I was a person because I was so much shorter. Never mind the fact that Smith was a halfling and Hilda, the DMPC, had a prosthetic leg. No matter how much they tried, the 3 of them couldn't break this crystal. Only I, with my mastery and knowledge of the earth, could find the vital spot. However, I couldn't do it from so far away, 10 to 15 feet away. I stepped forward immediately after a wave of energy dissipates. Roll a d6. My first roll was a 6, meaning that I safely dodged the brunt of the magic, only taking 1 or 2 points of damage. I was safe to move forward, but only 1 step. The DM interjected. Roll after roll, I was ducking and weaving. Halfway towards the crystal, on my 8th or 9th roll, I finally roll a 1. Dark magic washed over me, and I just instantly died. Post-mortem, my allies became able to break the crystal themselves and grab my lifeless corpse, hoping to carry me to Fish Pond's resident healer. It was then that the tower collapsed. My friends are battered and bruised, but my body was completely and utterly crushed beyond repair, according to the DM. The DM was happy to note that, by the way. The DMPC said something along the lines of, "Thank God he's gone," and bagged the reward money as well as all my magical items. I was fairly new to TTRPGs as a whole, so I thought it was just bad luck or a joke I didn't quite get. Nonetheless, I didn't come back to roll a new character. This is why I always say that DMs should get invested in the player characters in the party, because when you don't care about them or you hate them, it really shows. Now, of course, this DM is just cartoonishly bad, but usually this kind of thing can be a bit more covert and can lead to favoritism that you, the DM, might not even realize you're giving. So make sure to try to get invested in the players and characters in your party, and don't be a dick like this guy who just instantly kills off characters he doesn't like. So I recently started a gothic horror / grimdark campaign with a group of friends and friends of friends. We have a session 0 and discuss our characters, and everything is great so far. The only people in the story I didn't personally know is the DM. However, a close friend of mine assures me they're a pretty easygoing individual, and another person, Rogue, who we found through a Facebook group for our university. He is a fantastic person, despite what these events might lead you to believe. Party is all decided. However, key to the story is only 2 characters of the 7-person party and the DM. Those would be John, who's playing a Dampier Thief Rogue who hungers for the color lavender, and myself, playing a reborn Hexblade Warlock whose patron is an echo of her maker's soul, reaching past the Shadowfell through a set of magical weaver's tools that were originally used to create my character. The DM and I worked out that the tools themselves are a pseudo-sentient magical item containing a facsimile of my creator that are capable of mending clothing as if being used by the mending spell at will, and may also change the color of any fabric I choose. Now, my character, Coraline, because I am endlessly unoriginal, is a sentient doll created by her maker as a child, abandoned later in her maker's life and given life herself, Pinocchio style, when her maker killed herself after her husband was wrongfully accused of heresy and sentenced to life in exile. Every rest, she takes her routine of taking out her tools and mending the party's clothing, and will have panic attacks if she's unable to do so. Well, in recent session with Rogue, with the green light from me out of character, the Rogue decided to spur a roleplay interaction by stealing the Weaver's tools. After successfully stealing them, however, he loses them after shedding his surcoat to run from an enemy. So now we've completely lost the tools, and my connection to the patron, technically. After realizing my tools are missing, Caroline begins having a meltdown, and after learning Rogue was the reason that they lost it, it took the entire party and the Rogue profusely apologizing to calm her down and avoid the possible PvP. I should note, I did make sure to get the green light for any possible PvP consequences stealing my tools would bring. Party decides we're all going to hunt down the tools. We eventually track the thief to an abandoned village on the outskirts of the kingdom where we learn the tools have been destroyed. My character kills the individual responsible and proceeds to start sobbing uncontrollably. After calming down, Coraline asks for a funeral for her mother, the tools, to which the DM responds, "That's such a stupid idea. They're just an object." I explained to the DM that while yes, the tools are not truly sentient and are in fact just a magical object, Coraline views them as a parental figure, because they were literally used in her creation, and wouldn't care if they aren't actually sentient. DM says I'm acting childish and immature and that I should just get over it and grow up, instead of whining about not being able to have a funeral for my patron. I adamantly refuse to do anything until a funeral is held, to which the DM responds, "I guess Coraline leaves the party then." Important fact, that the party is all for having a funeral for a set of inanimate objects. Nobody but the DM has an issue with this. Either way, I respond by saying, "Guess I'll leave." And I leave. John messages me through Facebook, asking if I'm alright and apologizing for causing the entire situation. I assure him he's fine, and that he did nothing wrong, and that I messaged the group chat that I need some time to myself, and that I won't be making it for the rest of the sessions. Found out later that the DM made comments about Hexblade being stupid in general, and mocking me for being so attached to toys, ignoring the fact that these toys are the reason my character exists. Now, I do think that the OP is absolutely correct in this situation. The DM is being a dick. However, the OP gives the wrong reason, because if you didn't pick up on it, this is just an extended version of it's what my character would do. Of course, it's being used for a reason that is good. The party is all for this, it's not causing any problems. However, the justification is, in my opinion, still not good, and there's a better one that can be used. Instead of saying, "Oh, this is my character's backstory, here's the reasons why they would want to hold this funeral," the player should instead say, "I think the funeral would be an interesting roleplay interaction." Frankly, it's what my character would do is a video in itself. It's coming up this Monday. I'm absolutely going to talk about this. But yes, I do think that if you're going to justify a character decision, use out-of-game reasons. Like, this will spur an interesting roleplay encounter. This can create a cool interpersonal party dynamic, etc., etc., etc. Obviously, you need to use your character's backstory and personality to spur your decisions in-game, but when a disagreement arises and there's some sort of tension or controversy within the party, always use out-of-game reasons to show people why you made your decisions. With all that being said, the DM is a dick. Seriously, don't call people childish just for wanting to play their characters, especially when the whole rest of the group is good with it. This happened a few years back and caused me to change my rules on who is allowed to just show up in my games if it's affiliated with a community server. I was running the game Masks, a new generation for a community Discord server dedicated to PBTA. I posted the game on the server and invited players to a private run. I also use Roll20 for the sheets and notes. Around the time, I was pretty chill with allowing players to invite people to my server to listen or ask questions. It was nice since it gave people a chance to listen and or ask me anything about running games. This game, however, made me change my rules to only allowing players to stay in my servers. Part 1, the rules lawyer. I had 4 players in total. The only player that was important to the story was the rules lawyer, who I will call Joe. He was someone that I would consider to be a partially correct rules lawyer, since most of the time he would try to stop the game to make a claim that, while generally correct, he would be just generally a little bit off base when saying I was wrong. During the first session, one of my players rolled a miss and I had to make a hard move. GMs in Masks don't roll, but rather make moves based on the player's roll. Under the circumstance of the situation, I thought it would make sense for the player to mark a condition. I could not move on because Joe was not having this decision. He kept claiming that I couldn't make that choice and was livid about it. He kept attempting to pause the game so he could look through the book to prove me wrong by citing a different move I would have to make. I allowed this, thinking it would resolve itself quickly. About 5 minutes in, Joe didn't say anything and asked for one more chance. I was under the impression that he didn't want to admit he was wrong, so I just put a screenshot from the book stating condition marking as an option. This would happen a number of times over the course of one session. I don't want to get too much into every single time this happened, but it happened enough to where I had to table a lot of things I had planned for the next session. After the session, I asked Joe to refrain from interjecting every single time he disagrees with a rule, and either wait between breaks to discuss it with me or DM me. He agreed, and I thought it would be all good. I was wrong. Part 2, the rules lawyer's friend. Session 2 went by smoothly and I didn't run into any issues. Joe didn't interrupt the game with any issues with the rules and sent DMs to me once in a while. Session 3 is where things started to get worse. I came into the voice call that day a bit late and saw a new person there, who we will call Bob. Bob told me that he was new to Masks and wanted to learn more about how to run the campaign with the system. I was pretty excited, so I gave him a link to Roll20 and shared some of my campaign notes. Bob was quite engaging, asking questions covering the basics of the game and tips when making sure people get a good amount of spotlight each session. I didn't mind the questions since they were done via DMs. However, his questions started to gradually turn into suggestions on how he would run the game. I didn't mind them since they were pretty cool ideas, but some of them involved book knowledge about the game. Bob's ideas went from having a villain hijack a super train to incorporating Dr. Victoria and Merit, a company in my games. Merit is some kind of supernatural investigation company, and the information he mentioned were things you'd get from the books. It didn't add up, and I was a little confused, so I asked Bob if he was really new to Masks. He eventually told me that he was indeed a veteran GM and has been into TTRPGs longer than I have. When I asked why he pretended to not know anything, Bob said that he was invited by Joe to make sure I knew how to run the game correctly. I honestly wasn't angry but confused and a little betrayed by the fact that Joe was willing to invite someone to do that to me without any warning. When session 3 ended, I had a separate call with Joe to find out why he did that. He never really gave me an answer beyond,
I didn't think you were a good GM, but it's all good because Bob checked and said you were good, don't worry.
He didn't apologize and didn't seem to care that I was bothered by this. At that point, I knew this wasn't going to work out, so I just asked Joe not to come back. Bob left the server as well. The rest of the campaign went great. I invited an additional player to the game after a few more sessions, and no one seemed bothered by Joe leaving the game. I changed my rules since then, and have not run into issues like that again. Smart play. I have never been okay with having people observing my games. It's always been something that kind of psychs me out. But obviously, if you're good with that, that's great. But if you're a DM who cannot run with observers, put your foot down. Say something, because there's nothing worse than running a game while you're sweating and uncomfortable. It's just, that's not fun at all. If you want more motivation, your players can tell when you're nervous, and if having observers makes you nervous, then remove the thing that's making your games harder to run, the observers. Of course, the rules lawyering thing, we've talked about this before, but rules lawyers can be helpful, but when it's like this, it can just be downright annoying. This guy wasn't trying to be toxic, he thought he was being helpful, but look, communication is key, and this guy did not communicate to the DM that he was bringing in someone to vet their game, which is not something you just do on a whim. Tell people what's going on. I get wanting to follow the rules, but remember, D&D is all about the memories you create with your friends. At the end of a D&D session, what do you remember? Do you remember that epic moment where the player drove his longsword into the dragon's snout, killing it with an epic natural 20? Or do you remember the fact that the DM forgot to have the players roll with disadvantage because of exhaustion or something like that? No, of course not. The rules matter, but what really matters is the memories you create with your friends. And if you're ruining those memories to follow the rules, well, you got your priorities a little bit backwards. If you guys enjoyed this episode of RPG Horror Stories, you want to let me know, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then please do subscribe to Crispy's Tavern. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment vetting to let me know you made it to the end of the video. Now, since like, comment, subscribe, I will see you all next time. Farewell.